And welcome back to a news center. Let's now start our conversation this morning. Joining us is Felix Magaju, who is the director at the Kenya Climate Innovation Center, KCIC, to take us through some of the solutions to climate change. Welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you. Thanks, Purity.
Yes, and there's no question on what climate change is, because we are in the middle of the crisis occasioned by climate change. We are talking about drought. Now, the much anticipated rains have been predicted to fail in some parts of the country. I mean, we are talking about drought and the high cost of living. Is there a way out?
So thanks, Purity. Well, my name is Felix Magaju, working with the Kenya Climate Innovation Center. And I think the answer is yes. Yeah. And I think I was asking myself, why are we where we are today? Yeah. I mean, before I was born, drought was there in the country. I mean, drought has been an occurrence in Kenya for so many years. And the question is, why these occurrences? I think it's because of lack of proper planning. Yeah. I mean, when people misuse water resources, you know, when in terms of catchment areas, people cut trees, people don't understand why do we have scarcity of water in Kenya today. Mm-hmm. It's because of our actions yesterday, in terms of interfering with the catchment areas, in terms of not being innovative enough to really understand that it's not only me who really requires whatever I want to do, mm-hmm. because sometimes our actions today have consequences, you know, later 5-10 years to go. You cut trees, you just want to make money today and get a couple of things moving, but you're not asking yourself what the consequences of cutting trees in my 10-acre piece of land or 5-acre piece of land. Mm-hmm. So we are where we are today because of our actions yesterday. And I think both government and private sector need to rethink their ways of doing business. They think their ways of farming. They think their ways of doing whatever they're doing, so that we can be able, all of us putting our hands together, mm-hmm. we can be able to look for innovative solutions that can help us both to adapt, you know, to the effects of climate change. Yeah. It's real, it's here with us, and it will continue, mm-hmm. if we don't take collective measures. And
before we talk about the solutions, there are people, like you mentioned, who earn a living through cutting down trees and firewood and charcoal. Do you think there's enough support to offer these families probably alternative ways of making a living? Because if, for example, they ask, I abandon this activity, then what will my family eat tomorrow? That's the big question, and people struggling really. I'm assuming that's one of the causes of why we are still talking about people cutting down trees and making charcoals and all that.
Well, I think my answer is a strong yes. Mm. And I think people need to understand. If, for example, I'm in the charcoal business, it's true, I'm making money, I'm feeding my family through this business. Yeah. But the question I'm asking myself, if I thought there's no food in this country to buy with the money that we're making, then where do we get food? And so people need to start thinking innovatively. How do I adopt? For example, I'm in charcoal business. Can I be able perhaps to do something else along that value chain of, you know, creating innovative energy resources? Because you're providing energy to the whole, you know, and even hotels, most hotels in Nairobi, they use charcoal. And so the question is, I think for me the issue is, we need to create awareness to these people and show them that you can be able to do something that is better, that can be able to really support Kenyans in terms of, you know, ensuring that we have had this crisis of climate change. So people who are doing charcoal, it is a business, and I agree, it's the people who are doing oil. The effects of oil in Kenya, I mean, in all over the world, they are very clear. And so, but of course, you have to lead people to an alternative, because you can't tell people to stop cutting trees and then tell them what will they start doing. Awareness creation, both from government and private sector, needs to come in handy. Can I be able to do something else? Can I be able to do an alternative business, perhaps along that value chain of cutting trees? The answer is yes. Mm-hmm. Even in terms of planting trees, people need to understand, perhaps I can be able to start encouraging even people. There are so many people in Kenyans today who have 10 acres and they're not doing anything on it. Yeah. And so the question is, how do you encourage everybody who has a piece of land somewhere to start planting trees? And it doesn't even cost so much amount of money. Perhaps even with 5,000, 10,000, somebody who has 2-acre piece of land somewhere lying down in the rural areas can plant trees that can be able to help us in terms of providing, you know, energy resources to the people in the urban areas. Yeah. So it's an issue of planning, it's an issue of being innovative, it's an issue of being adaptive, and look for adaptive solutions that can be able to help us. The good thing is, they are everywhere. Young people are coming up with so many adaptive solutions. The problem is, we are not supporting them to be able to scale up these solutions and provide a means of revenue to so many people who can be able to be employed, who can be able to plug into these ideas and get a couple of things moving.
And talking about the solutions and support to communities, do you think maybe climate action is being given the priority it deserves in terms of financing?
I would say, depending on where you're sitting, it's a yes or no. But to be frank, I don't think we have enough resources to be able to implement all that we would like to implement. And not just as a country, you know, when I look at, for example, the policies that have been put in place, both perhaps in forestry management, both, you know, look at energy, we still have a bigger gap in climate financing. Because I think most of us look at it in terms of, you know, the government and development partners coming to give us billions of dollars to be able to effect a couple of things. But I think also from a private sector perspective, people companies need to understand, how do I play my law in a small way, you know. So I think the issue is, in as long as we are looking at it as a government thing, we'll never have enough resources with the government to be able to effect some of these changes that we need to. We also need to put our hands together as private sector. There's so much money in private sector. There are so many foundations today in Kenya that are doing a lot of planting trees, but it should be done in a very coordinated approach. If we can be able to really direct those monies to look at solutions that have been proposed or that have been innovated, that can be able to have large scale effects in terms of drought in Kenya today, I think we'll be in a better position. So I will look at it in terms of private sector should be able to have their game in terms of climate financing. That's the way I look at it.
And the current drought, of course, the country, and not just the country, but Africa, most of the African countries have had, including Kenya, really subsequent failed rainy seasons. I think 5 to 6 failed rainy seasons, contributing to this drought that is now being termed as the worst in 40 years. So let's talk about what are some of the possible solutions now, because our main issue as a country is food insecurity.
Well, thanks, Peter. The question that perhaps I'm asking myself, why do we have drought today?
Yes, and why is it the worst?
And I am tempted to say perhaps it's not even the worst. Maybe we have had bad situations before. My thought is that on this is that I think we have solutions. They may take some time to implement because, of course, they need some time, you know, to be able to be actualized. I approve the government on a couple of initiatives in terms of what the president is talking about, planting of trees. Because truth be told, if we don't do it now, believe you me, a time is coming when perhaps 90% of our Arab land can't give us food. And that means the situation will continue to worsen. And so people need to understand we are where we are in terms of drought, because people need to ask, why do we have drought in Kenya today? If you ask any rainman on the, you know, walking, they will talk about rain. But the question I've always asked, does it mean that Kenya is so much dependent on rain to be able to produce food? The answer is yes. Are there alternatives to that? The answer is yes. The issue is we have not been able to capitalize those innovative solutions to be able to provide adaptive solutions to be able to give us that. And so if I look at Saudi Arabia, they are really irrigating. They are doing a lot of, you know, food production in lands that have never maybe received rain for the last maybe 50 years, so to speak. Here in Kenya, we are crying because we have not received rain maybe for 4 or 5 years. Israel the same. And so the question is, how do we put all the stakeholders to start thinking about the people in the villages? How can we support them to be able to understand, number one, that cutting trees in the catchment areas is a problem, that planting some tree species that consume large amount of water is a problem. It's right in the village now, people can be able to understand that when you tell them uproot this because this is consuming so much water, they understand, because they have gone so many days without the food, they are tracking so many distances to fetch water. So I think for me the issue here that is one is about awareness creation, and people need to be told the truth. Continue cutting trees, the effect is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Plant trees, the effect is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that one will make people to start thinking, what is the role of utility as an individual in when you go back to your rural areas? Planting 10 trees will not cost you so much. You just take the trees and plant them and start watering them and look for ways and means of ensuring sustainably those trees have grown up. That will have consequences in terms of trapping CO2, that is, you know, messing up our atmosphere, and other effects of planting trees. So for me, it's about awareness creation. It's about ensuring that the machinery of government, national government and county government, have really sensitized people on what needs to be done. And that doesn't have to really cost us so much. I always say planting trees should not be a very expensive exercise. If all of us can be able to look at it from that, if I can be able to go to where I come from and think of how do I support our people to get water, water is becoming scarce and scarce every day. Where I come from, a number of rivers have dried up. Why? Because there are some guys upstream who have really diverted water. And then what are they doing with the water? That's a question people should be able to ask. Irrigation. But some of those things they are doing, like yesterday I was in a certain hotel, let me not mention their name. And what shocked me is, these guys have maybe 2 acre piece of land, you know, as a garden. What are they? They are not irrigating or, you know, using sprinklers. They are using almost a one inch pipe to be able to pour water on the ground. And I asked this young gentleman, you mean you have no other way of conserving this water? Where do you want to spill thousands of gallons of water, just, you know, ensuring that the gardens is green? And there are some places in Nairobi today that are really being affected by lack of water. So that's why I'm saying the private sector also has a major role to play.
When you talk about irrigation, the notion that most people have is that it's an expensive kind of exercise. If, for example, I am to adopt irrigation as a home, then a lot of resources are involved. Maybe you can tell us if that is true, and what probably the leadership of this country, not just the national government, but also at the county level, at the constituency level, can do really to support homes in this irrigation, because I think that's the only solution with the predictions of failed rains and all that.
Well, I think it's a perception thing. And I think that people need to understand, one, we have very simple, cost-effective solutions, you know, on irrigation. I mean, some sprinklers will cost even 100 shillings. I have bought a sprinkler to demonstrate to people. I have bought a locally made sprinkler that is doing a good job. It has never had any issues. So I think the issue is, people need to understand that irrigation should not be an expensive affair. The same way people started thinking, you know, solar is an expensive thing. Today, perhaps with 2,000, you can be able to get a solar kit that can be able to light up your home, that can be able perhaps even to do a few things at home. So irrigation, when you look at, you know, buying a pipe today perhaps is 1,000 Kenya shillings. Putting a sprinkler perhaps is 200 shillings. I was looking at that hotel, you know, before even you go to the rural areas, I'm looking at this hotel in Nairobi. Frankly speaking, this hotel can be able to afford the largest, you know, irrigation system that you can ever think. But, you know, for them the perception is we have water. Or perhaps even irrigation system is expensive. It's a perception, it's a mentality issue. So I think that is what I'm talking about, awareness creation, and both from a private sector perspective and also government perspective. Because the two of them should be able to work hand in hand to be able to resolve the issues. And we should be able to take small incremental, you know, solutions. And I was also telling you, that we have so many innovations that we have supported in KCAC. Very simple but cost-effective irrigation systems. Let me give you an example outside irrigation. I meant that we have supported and financed a client who has come up with he's in the beehive keeping industry. So he has come up with a beehive that does not cut trees to build up a beehive. And people don't understand, even beehive keeping is a costly affair in this country. Because if you look at the number of trees they have to cut to be able to build those beehives, it's quite heavy. And so this gentleman comes up with a beehive that uses, you know, blocks of stones. Very effective, much more better than actually a firewood, a wood beehive. And when you look at it, it's around 10,000 Kenya shillings. The other is around 6,000. It's long lasting. It can even stay for 30 to 40 years. And it has, when you look at the effects of that beehive on our forestry, it's quite good. So what I'm saying is, and also I think also private sector people like KCAC also need to come up very strongly in terms of actually now speaking about the innovations that we have supported that can be scaled up in Kenya, and people can be able to uptake them and adapt them and learn with them.
Let's talk about addressing the food insecurity. I know irrigation is one of it because we could grow crops courtesy of irrigation, but where we are now, the high cost of living, the prices of commodities, really the basic ones, really high. So how can we normalize things without having, because the government says that subsidies is not the way to go?
Well, from where I stand, it's a costly thing that we have to undertake. It will pinch our pockets. It will pinch, you know, the common man will feel the pinch. Because the issue is the price of rice is going up and basic commodities, as you're saying. But the question is, how do we, in the long term, avoid such kind of a scenario? But in the short term, we have to feel the pinch. If we have to put that 7 billion or 10 billion in subsidies, the question is, can that money perhaps be used to do something else? The answer is yes. But at the same time, we should not be able to look at a long-term solution. At the same time, ignore, because people will suffer. Maybe when people pass, some people will be affected to an extent that they can't be able to get food. So I think we need a balance. And the balance is perhaps, can we be able to do even half? Subsidize this, or perhaps, and we need to ask ourselves questions. Is the issue of maize planting in this country such a big issue that we can't be able to start adopting even climate resilient breeds of maize? Because I think that's where even the question is. We are right now, the kind of maize that we are doing in Kitale and in Wasingishu is 3 months or 4 months. Can we start thinking of better maize that can be able to take a shorter period to be able to mature? That is, perhaps if at all we have 4 or 5 days of rain, or maybe 10 days of rain, then we can be able to really harvest. No matter how small the quantities will be. So I think we need to look at it from that perspective, long term, but at the same time also take care of the immediate, because we don't want to kill people. Looking at long term solutions that perhaps will take maybe 2 or 3 years to be able to stabilize the country in terms of food production. So those initiatives, those innovative ways of doing things, we should be able to adopt as a country, or even county governments. I was talking the other day about a fund called FROCA in this country that sits at the Treasury, and I'm asking myself, donors, development partners have put so much amount of money there. I think it is good also to look at our systems, the way we're implementing things. If we can be able to fast track some of these things, we'll be able to have short-term measures that can be able to unlock the kind of impact that there is right now. So I think the resources are there, the people are there. We just need to look at what needs to be done right now that can be able to help alleviate the pain that is there right now.
Maybe you can help us highlight some of the things that can be done short term, because people are really suffering right now. Over 2 million livestock already have been lost due to the ongoing drought. So the short term, because we've been talking about the long term plans, but again, how can we support the people that are currently suffering from the ongoing drought?
Well, one is I'm looking, for example, at KCAC. We have some programs running in Northeastern. So a number of entrepreneurs we have financed there to be able to perhaps look for innovative ways of getting those livestock out, because they don't have anything to eat, and perhaps bringing technologies like they may not be mass. They may not be adopted from on a mass scale. For example, hydroponics kind of systems that can be able to take at least some feeds to Northeastern, to a few farmers that we have incubated and supported and financed to be able to take care of their livestock. It's at a personal level from a KCC perspective, but I also believe that we have so many development partners who are doing a lot of work in Northeastern. So I think for me is, if we can be able to put up some short-term measures, the government can also come on board to buy off those kind of livestock and provide some kind of relief to those farmers or those individuals in Northeastern. It's not something convenient, because to be frank, this thing has been done before. We have seen government putting those measures before. That's why I'm talking about long-term planning. Even if we buy those things right now, and perhaps in the next 3, 4, 5 months it rains, the question is, what are we doing in Northeastern today to avert another crisis in the next 1 or 2 years? For me, that's the most important thing. We can be able to deploy resources today and save people, give them food. That can be done, and that should be the prerogative of the government and county governments to be able to divert perhaps development resources to alleviate this short-term pain. But for me, I'll look at long-term planning. What needs to be done today? I've seen people planting trees in Northeastern, but at the same time, I ask myself, right now, how many of those trees are surviving? Did we think of putting up a bowl? Or perhaps we just put up a tree, but never asked ourselves, where do we get water to water these kind of things? Long-term, awesome planning needs to be at the center.
And as we wind up, maybe for a Kenyan who is looking at now, no rains, no food on the table, what are some of the tips? Are they tips or alternative ways of survival that they could adopt, whether it's a farmer or even someone living in an urban setup? What are some of the alternative ways to, like you said, irrigation? It's one of the alternative ways to the failed rainy season, but again to ensuring that your family is secure from food insecurity.
I was talking to someone the day before yesterday, and I was telling them, you have a very big house, and then she was complaining about, the cost of sukuma wiki in the country, and I was asking her, it will not cost you even 3,000 to be able to plant You don't have to have even a garden. In Nairobi, for example, the urban areas, we have technologies that people have come up with. You know, put up a sack. You can plant your kales or sukuma wiki or whatever it is. They require minimal amounts of water.
Okay.
So those are very easy things that you can be able to put there, put up a bag. And
all right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And we have to wrap it up. Thank you so much for your time. That brings us to the end of our news center this morning. Thank you for your company. I'm Purity Musianzuki. Keep watching KTN News. Good morning.